What is up, YouTube? My name is Eben, and this is our final week of Back to the Beginning. And we're going to take a look at our deck and where it's gone and where it's come from and where we can go from here. Um, I think we can do this best just by kind of looking through our deck, but before we really begin, let's talk about our matches and our opponents right quick. We've played a number of competitive opponents and competitive decks, and as far as competing against, tier 1-ish kind of stuff, for the most part, we don't quite have it together yet, but we can take wins against certain opponents. Um, Kind of our signature Pokemon here, Amnesia Whiscash, seems to be able to really put the screws on certain opponents who rely upon one attack. Now, of course, opponents who have cheap retreats can usually get around it, and our 100 HP is definitely a handicap in this regard. But it still gives us some hope as to the idea that this deck could be something we could actually play with and succeed with to some extent. We've kind of reached a juncture right now with our deck, which is why I'm stopping here, where we kind of have to make a choice. We don't really have the trade fodder to get the things we need to get really competitive really quickly, so it would make the most sense to buy single cards online. But if we're going to do that, we have to ask ourselves if it would just make more sense to buy the cards to build a completely different deck, since we're committing money to singles already. A tried and true, tested tier 1 kind of deck. Maybe not the most expensive one, but still something that could compete a little bit better. And that's a question you have to ask yourself when you're getting into a game. Do I want to, if I'm going to invest money in singles, which is the most economical way to do it, versus buying booster packs, which may be more fun, but is not going to get you to winning any kind of an event particularly quickly. We have to ask ourselves if that's the route we want to go or not. And if you want to do it the more fun way, then continuing the way we have been, buying packs and trading slowly, hey, that's a fun way to go, and I am all for that. But if we're looking to compete and maybe try to win a locals or go to a city championship or something like that, then we're probably looking toward buying stuff online and building maybe a whole other deck. So anyway, but as far as this deck goes, we can actually win pretty effectively against less competitive opponents, people who aren't necessarily running tier 1 stuff. This deck's actually fairly consistent and seems to do okay. Our 3 Whiscash are something I definitely want to keep around if we were to keep building this. That's definitely something I agree with. And of course, our 3 Barboach are pretty necessary there. Now, our 2 different Milotic, personally, I think obviously the Energy Grace one has not been super fantastic, especially surrendering the prize card. That hasn't been awesome. But Sparkling Ripples Milotic, which allows us to go into our discard pile and get any card back when we evolve it from our hand, I mean, that's pretty cool. But I don't know if it's really justifying the 4 card slots we're committing right now. And while it's a cool trick, it's probably just not worth having. So if we were going to continue, I'd probably drop Milotic. And if we were going to do that, we would also be dropping Feebas, and we'd probably be doing that to make room for some items to kind of give us a little more consistency, a little more speed, and maybe a little more aggressive power. Our 1 copy of Kyurem has been, it's been interesting. It's never been bad, but honestly, we've never really had an occasion where I really wanted to go get it and use it in particular. And that and the fact that it's going to cycle out in a few months, most likely, is another reason I would probably drop this Kyurem as well, making room for a little bit more in the way of muscly EX Pokemon. Speaking of which, our Greninja EX has been awesome, and I would definitely want to go get a second one for this deck, largely just because having the 1 is kind of a problem. I mean, we only have the 1, and if something happens to it, then we don't have a backup, and if it's prized or something, then we're just out of luck. And it's hard to get it out of our prizes when we need it to help us take knockouts to go get those prizes. Our Swampert is also going to probably benefit from the fact that I'm going to go ahead and blow it, even though we're not quite there yet in the deck. I'm probably almost really going to drop the Hawlucha and the Darkrai if we were to continue. And its Mudflood would really appreciate going monocolor. But even then, I don't know that that's really worth it, and its Hydro Tackle's recoil to yourself. I'd probably be looking to find a better alternative to Swampert. And if we're going to go heavier on our double colorless energies, which I think we really should, then this guy could easily turn into, say, Seismitoad EX in the long run. Now, Dedenne has been quite useful to us, and I wouldn't mind keeping it. It hits a number of things very effectively. It can threaten Yveltal EX, it can threaten Rayquaza potentially. And its entrainment really helps us go get what we need, helps us get Barboaches or specific EXs, so I got no problem keeping this guy around. Bouffalin's been kind of a little underwhelming. While he's an interesting idea, I just don't think he's going to pull his weight in the end, so he'd probably get dropped. Hawlucha and Darkrai mainly made it because we were just looking for something, anything to be muscle, and I would drop these guys in favor of some water-type EXs as soon as we could pick them up. Something that's relatively fast, but also hits kind of hard. Seismitoad EX, like I say, is probably a pretty good choice for this slot, but Greninja EX, of course, could also do some work. So these guys could go, which would allow us to just sort of streamline our energy to just water. Now I got no problem with our 4 Professor Sycamores. Obviously, that's awesome for us. Our 4 Shaunas, I've never complained about that. I've actually really gotten to like the supporter lineup in this deck. It's pretty darn consistent. So I actually don't have a problem with the 4 Shaunas, believe it or not. We have 2 Professor Birch's observations, and they're okay. And while statistically it's of course slightly better than Shauna because your average number of cards will technically, mathematically speaking, be 5.5 on Professor Birch, which is a little more than Shauna's 5. The thing is, if you're in a tight spot, early game or late game, rolling that 4 hurts a lot. And getting the 7 versus the 4 is often just a more good thing. And the 4 usually would have been just enough, kind of. So, like, the 7 isn't necessarily that much of an incentive over 5, basically, is what I'm trying to say. So, keeping this guy or not keeping this guy, I mean, I'm cool with keeping him, but I'm not such an enthusiast that I would say run him over Shauna numerically. I don't think I would do that necessarily, but that's in many ways a taste choice kind of thing. Our fan club is okay, but it's one of our more droppable supporters. Especially if we're going to opt for Dedenne, we don't necessarily need this. We could turn this into something maybe a little bit different, maybe a little bit more useful. So that could be a slot to get another supporter of some kind. Like maybe even a second copy of Teammates. With a lot of one prize Pokemon, we can easily opt for a second Teammates. So that's what our fan club could turn into. And our 1 Lysander obviously is still quite useful. It's allowing us to go get things, and Versus Seeker is another item we could definitely try to add that would capitalize on the utility of having one-of copy supporters. Our muscle bands have been amazing for us. They've been very useful. I would definitely, one of the items I would add for the slots we're making is a 4th muscle band. This makes Whiscash worthwhile with his amnesia, and adding Seismitoad EX, those guys could both do some pretty nasty things to our opponents with muscle bands, obviously. This could be a very cool version of Control, basically, that we're building here. And something we might revisit later, hint, hint, hint. But anyway, our 2 Ultra Balls have been quite useful. Really don't need more. This is pretty good. But if we go Mono Water, we could probably just opt for Dive Ball, actually, over the Ultra Ball. So we might just drop the Ultra Ball altogether in favor of more copies of this Dive Ball. Because if all our Pokemon are Water type, then obviously we don't really need to be discarding the 2 cards. We don't have any cards that like to discard things or be discarded. So, Trainer Mail, that's another one we could add more copies of. It's just a great utility card that can help us go fetch things. And our 2 Professor's Letter have been quite useful. But if we take away the fact that we're running multiple colors, this becomes a little less useful, and we might be able to drop it down to 1. Arguably, you could even run 0 of them, honestly, since we're not opting for Skyla or anything like that. There's no Corina. Really, we don't necessarily have to run it at all. Once again, that comes down to taste a little bit. Acrobike is very good, but we don't necessarily need to discard anything. But we do have cards we could discard, so this one's up to taste as to whether or not we keep the Acrobike. It can be quite good, it could be quite pointless, it's hard to say. Our Evo Sodas are another one that's kind of up to your choice as a player. It's very nice for getting our Whiscash up, and I'd probably want to opt for a 4/4 line of Whiscash in this deck. So, honestly, you could run the Evo Soda, but you could also opt out of it and just use the fact that we have 4 and 4 and our Dive Balls to basically make it happen anyway. So the Evo Soda is not necessarily necessary. Personally, I'd probably drop it for just that reason, because we only have the 1 line to evolve up anyway if we drop Milotic. Our Energy Switch is quite nice, but for the direction I'm planning on going with this deck, I'd actually probably end up dropping it, especially because Double Colorless Energy can't be moved with this. So I'd actually probably drop that. And honestly, the card I'd put in for it would almost surely be a second copy of Switch, because this is a card we found we really needed with our high retreat costs. And if Darkrai is going away, we definitely want a second Switch at least. And that just leaves our energy. And of course, we currently have 9 water energies, and we'd probably be running just a little bit more water, maybe 1 or 2. We'd be completely pulling out our 3 darks and 2 fightings, and opting for 2 more double colorless energies as we go along this interesting Whiscash Seismitoad EX kind of line we'd most likely be following. So there you go, that's our present and our potential future, but this project is done as of today, and starting next week, we will be starting with a whole different kind of project for Theme Deck Thursday, so keep your eyes open for that. And until next time, like, comment, subscribe, and check out my channel for more Pokemon content.